everybody, and welcome to the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christian Cutlick.
And on today's show, we're going to do the final of our Halloween specials for this year, because last year we did way too many and took up too many topics, and we need another year to figure out some topics. But today's topic is going to be Kaiju films. I was slightly hesitant to pick Kaiju, but it is a horror movie, and I think to people who don't watch a lot of horror movies, they probably don't break it off as much.
Now, it's a weird genre, too, in that it goes through really big boom and bust. It seems like they're trying to do a big boom with it now, but really it's like a relic of like the 70s and 60s, oddly enough. But I do think it does get into that horror genre, but it's more like a weird blend of like horror and sci-fi, and also just like action movie. It's a really weird like genre in its own right.
Yeah, it kind of does depend on how grim the action is framed. Like it should be like horrifying, but we don't always get that. Sometimes we get like something more akin to Independence Day.
Yeah, or you get like Cloverfield or Ultraman, which are like completely different types of movies in themselves.
There's an interesting lineage with that too. We'll get into that as we talk about it, I'm sure. So I'll start off if you want. My first pick is one that I wasn't 100% sure I was going to pick, but then I sort of realized that I think it is the best of maybe the last 20 years, and that would be Kong Skull Island from 2017. Directed by Jordan Vogt-Roberts, who had done Kings of Summer prior to it. More recently, he's done the pilot for the Walking Dead World Beyond show, the newest Walking Dead show that we all asked for and we really wanted. That's not his fault. No, we just cannot get enough. There has not been enough Walking Dead. He's going on supposedly to direct the Metal Gear Solid movie. He's probably one of 400 directors that could say that they were working on it, but that is supposedly where he's going. We'll see what happens with that. I'm actually really surprised he hasn't had bigger work after this film, because I thought it came together really well. Screenplay by Dan Gilroy, who had done Nightcrawler, which is excellent if you haven't seen that. Real Steel, which is a lot better than you might think it is. And The Bourne Legacy. Max Borenstein also worked on the screenplay. He also worked on the 2014 Godzilla and Godzilla King of the Monsters, which followed Kong Skull Island. Backed up again with Derek Connolly, becoming a real big go-to guy for the studios. Started off with Safety Not Guaranteed, but had his hands on Rise of Skywalker, who we don't really know where in the process, but a pretty big controlling factor on the Jurassic World movies. Story originally from John Gattens, who started out as an actor himself, but most notably, and people are going to disagree with it, he wrote Ready to Rumble in 2001 for WCW and Warner Brothers.
Another random wrestling fact.
Gotta work them in where I can. I love Kong Skull Island. I think, as we were talking to, you can make things more horrific by making the consequences more grim. I felt like they did that really well. There's also this sort of constant callback to Apocalypse Now, which itself, is referencing Heart of Darkness, which is where King Kong originally came out of too. It's sort of this weird thing where, Heart of Darkness gets, like, for lack of a better word, bastardized over the 20th century. And those are the two biggest films that really take from it. And now they're kind of getting smashed back together. And I think that's really cool. And I also think it is just really well written. It's funny when it's supposed to be funny. Characters are pretty well developed. It's a really balanced kaiju film, which is rare, to say the least.
Yeah, this is also like we were saying, genres kind of collide in kaiju films, and this is kind of a weird, like, Apocalypse Now version of kaiju movies. The way they said it in the 70s, and even like this basic like story structure is like that. But I do like how after the kind of weird Peter Jackson King Kong movies, we get back to something that feels a bit more threatening. It even gets away from the roots of King Kong in a lot of way by focusing a lot more on like the strange, like not alien, but like foreign nature aspect of King Kong, and really like trying to dig into that. While they also have Godzilla being a bit more of like a science influence thing going on, which I think is cool. It's a weird film, but I do also really enjoy it as well. I think it came together really well, and I think as it goes forward, I think the only thing it's held back by is the fact that it's supposed to be played into this larger like kaiju cinematic universe Universal is trying to build because they have like 4 different universes in the works. And
It's
I think that's the only thing that often holds me down on this film. Just having that weird thought in the back of my mind. But beyond that, I think the way they kind of add in all these like Platoon and Apocalypse Now references into this like movie and make this really weird threat out of King Kong, I think that's really cool.
yeah, it's called the Monsterverse. Very creative. Uh, and we'll be continuing into what is actually quite anticipated King Kong versus Godzilla. It's interesting that you brought up the Peter Jackson King Kong. You really have, the original film, which, as we said, like takes notes from Heart of Darkness, but is really its own thing ultimately. If you watch that, it's a very brief movie. It's pretty simple. It's very much about like we shouldn't take King Kong out of the jungle. Oops, we did. And then he's obsessed with the blonde girl who was with them, and that in people's minds turned into like a love story. It's not really there in the original movie. And then what I appreciate about Peter Jackson's version is Peter Jackson then made a movie of the King Kong story that people told each other. And
Yeah,
like,
but it's like 4 hours long, and there's a bunch of just like nonsense in between what he actually wants to talk about.
yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. And I don't think it's his best work. I don't think it's terrible. I think the theatrical cut is easier to digest. There's the much longer cut. But part of the reason that much longer cut came out was because how well the extended cuts of Lord of the Rings were doing, but it's also something of a very different nature, and I don't think the studios maybe fully understood that. I think that this takes things back to like the weirdness of Skull Island in the original movie, where Skull Island is this place where like, I don't know, there's dinosaurs and a giant spider and like watch out. The cool new aspect of it is now you have like soldiers there as opposed to just like a film crew.
I think even them bringing in like a military aspect into it is a lot more. I think it's able to draw out a lot more out of King Kong than just like these like weird carnival people who just happen to be rich, just happening to find a giant ape and then bringing it back. Like I think that idea of adding all these military influences into this really adds a lot more to King Kong as being this kind of like weird unstoppable force.
Yeah, and it definitely plays into, that world building that they're doing. And, they've continued pretty successfully. I think Godzilla King of the Monsters, the recent one, may not have been as smart as Kong Skull Island or the 2014 Godzilla, but it got the job done, and you got a lot of cool effects, and I think it got everyone kind of pumped for the next thing. As we both kind of said, this one makes the list because it maybe shouldn't work with all the elements it has going, but then does.
He was also inspired a lot by anime, which also ties into my pick here, Shin Godzilla, which is the newest rendition of Godzilla made by Hideki Anno, who was the director of Neon Genesis Evangelion, the whole show and the movies and things like that. Godzilla is was made as a direct response to the Universal version of Godzilla, which I don't know how you feel about it, but I always kind of disliked that version. And the Japanese audiences especially disliked that version because that Godzilla was bigger than their Godzilla, and that can't happen. So Anno made the biggest Godzilla possible, and it shoots lasers, and it can fly, and it can do everything. But I think what Hideki Anno does with this version of Godzilla is that he really brings out the social commentary aspect that's been missing from a lot of Godzilla films for a while now, in that Japan has problems just bringing this thing down. Not because they lack military strength, but because there's a lot of red tape and bureaucratic, very old bureaucratic things weighing them down that makes it impossible for them to move like legally. And it's really cool. Like in many Godzilla films, there's not really much character to it. but Anno's directing style is very clear throughout this entire film, in that there's a lot of like really quick cuts. There's a lot of emphasis on like size, down angles, up angles, things like that. And it's more focused on the threat of the monster rather than the monster itself.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the 2014 Godzilla. I actually do like the 2014 Godzilla. I think it's, I think it has flaws, but I think most of those flaws come from an attempt to match the kind of pacing that a lot of the earlier Godzilla films had. As far as that Godzilla in Japan, because we're talking about, this idea that the Shin Godzilla, um, Shin, if I'm correct, means true, right?
Yeah.
I had heard like a weird thing where that whole angle on Godzilla like 2014 was largely exaggerated to build up Shin Godzilla.
Really? I did
Now,
not
I
hear
think
that.
that like it did fine and a lot of people liked it just fine, and then they took like this very vocal minority and made it sound like, oh, we don't want like this Americanized Godzilla, we want, the real Godzilla. And like they kind of used that as like the fuel for the movie, like the promotion. It's be so hard for us to really figure that out. That would probably take us like 3-4 months of research and having to get things translated. But I did hear that it was not as poorly received as they made it sound when Shin Godzilla came out.
That's
Getting back to
interesting.
Shin Godzilla is super cool because it does one of the things we were discussing where Shin Godzilla is creepy. It's like
Yeah.
constantly like leaking and like it has going through stages of metamorphosis. Like it's very strange, and I think that's really cool because it's something that really hasn't been done too frequently on, I would say, like feature kaiju stuff. A lot of like anime and manga deal with themes like that, but as far as like a real big budget, a Godzilla movie, this is the first time where that type of like creepy monster has been used.
Yeah, he really brings out the horror aspect out of Godzilla, in that, like you were saying, it's always leaking, but it always looks like it's in pain too. It's like barely moving around, and it's not really doing anything besides walking. And even it just walking, it's like massively destructive. And like the reasons why it's walking is just because it's in pain a lot. And like the whole thing is just like this really bizarre, like Frankenstein monster just stomping around, and that's harkens back to like the original Godzillas too. And I think that's a really cool aspect as well. Is like this is a much more horrifying Godzilla than like the campier Godzillas we got with like Mech Godzilla and things like that.
Yeah, I agree in that respect too. As you were saying, like it's almost, this like painful progression. And the other aspect of that I really like, radiation is the basis of all of these essentially. And radiation is played with most of these monsters like, oh, they're absorbing the radiation, they're getting super strong. This one is like, this seems more like something that mutated out of like an explosion and like really shouldn't exist but does, and like what are we going to do now? That's the great thing that Shin Godzilla brings back to the series that I think has been missing almost immediately. Not to hammer on anything, but my next pick is Godzilla. Or Gojira, 1954, directed by Ishiro Honda, screenplay by Honda and Takeo Murata, story by Shigeru Kayama, who himself was a novelist, but all these gentlemen also pretty much kept moving forward with kaiju films, some tokusatsu, as they went through their careers. As we were just saying, there's that terror of what radiation can cause, and Shin Godzilla, 50 years after, we're looking at it a little differently. More than 50 years, jeez.
Yeah, 70.
God, Godzilla in itself, I think, embodied that fear at the time. The first Godzilla movie, there's nothing pleasant about Godzilla. There's no Godzilla's here to save us. There's no Moth for him to fight. It's just this monster destroying a city because humans are stupid and made this thing, and it's struggle, and now we're struggling to figure out how we can kill it. I like both cuts. I think both the Japanese cut and the American version with the inserts work really well. It's one of those movies that you pop in and you kind of expect it not to hold up as well as it does, and it just does. It's a good movie. It's well put together, and it starts, as you were saying, like what, 60 years of film.
Yeah, it starts a whole not just like a genre in like kaiju, but also just like the whole tokusatsu genre. Like it's directly influences Super Sentai, Kamen Rider, all those things. Like that basic framework is all rooted in this this monster movie where there's a guy in a rubber suit that was almost constantly passing out.
Little did he know how important he would be.
But that's the cool thing about the Godzilla. Like, yeah, what we were saying, I think Shin Godzilla is a more like direct update of that original Godzilla. But here, like the original still holds up. It's just that, you kind of have to go into this going like, well, it's going to be like a really slow 50s sci-fi movie. There's going to be a lot of talking and things like that, not a whole lot of Godzilla stomping around blowing up things. But even with that in mind, like this movie is still a classic. Like, it's probably one of the few films in the Criterion collection that are like this. But it being recognized by the Criterion and all these film scholars speaks to the influence and the quality of this film.
I just have to say this before someone points it out in the comments or something. But just so you know, Criterion released a box set of
Yeah,
20 Godzilla movies, so
I
it's
almost
not.
bought
But
that.
yeah, I think I don't. I'm surprised I don't have it right now. The box is really hard to fit on a shelf, though.
It's huge. And well, I wanted to get it because Becky Cloonan did a bunch of art for it.
Yeah, it does look great. Now we can post this in like a Blu-ray forum. Awesome, good. Hi guys. Now you know how we got here. But yeah, I think Godzilla. I always think of the commercial in Halloween 3 that they refer to as Halloween as the immortal classic. So I would say Godzilla is a true immortal classic, especially when it comes to this genre.
You can knock this down, but I was going to pick my next one is the Mystery Science Theater on the Gamera films.
I think that's fair.
Because I think the Gamera films, like, they're kind of like this weird, they're kind of a ripoff of Godzilla, but like the way, like Gamera kind of represents this whole weird wave of monster movies and how like poor and odd they can get. And Mystery Science Theater does a great job on riffing on them and making these really kind of slow, bad movies really enjoyable to watch while also kind of seeing like this weird growth of monster movies.
Yeah, Gamera is something that's funny. I own all of them on Blu-ray, literally all the ones that have come out. But it's one of those ones where I think it did come out on one of the volumes of the MST3K stuff.
There's a whole box set of the Gamera stuff.
Oh, just from them?
Yeah. Like there's
See,
a
I
whole
didn't
like
know that.
set just for Mystery Science Theater doing Gamera.
Well, even beyond that, there's also the Elvira DVDs, which I don't think are in print anymore, also have Gamera. So I actually own 2 copies of the first film, one on Blu-ray and one with Elvira talking about it. And I would say that, yes, it is worth the extra commentary. Yeah, and in addition to, these MST3K and Elvira and wonderful Mill Creek Blu-ray releases, there was also a collector's edition that came out through Arrow that I think is already gone. That tends to be the way those Arrow Blu-rays go. So if you ever see something you want, make sure you pre-order it. But yeah, Gamera, I would say for like people who got really into Godzilla when they were kids, seems like an equal. And then you go back to it and you're kind of like, no, I still like this.
Like I don't want to say they're like terrible movies. They're not, but I think it's also just colored by me watching Mystery Science Theater. But like just the way Gamera looks, it's not as good as Godzilla. I think just like the whole shell and things like that, and it being a turtle, it's not like as intimidating.
But he's
But
a
like,
friend to all the children.
yeah, he's flying around with like jets from his feet. It's just I think Gamera really exemplifies how campy and fun kaiju films can get. And that makes a great father for Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah, and any other late night horror sci-fi programming, always with working on the camera. By the way, if you do get the Elvira ones, I do warn you, the cuts of the movies are not the TV cuts. So sometimes she'll be acting like nothing's happened because they had to cut everything out of the movie, and it's really confusing. But it's worth getting. It's Elvira. Support her. I think that brings us to the end of our Halloween episodes this year. So I would like to say a happy Halloween. A bit of a shame that we're getting a full moon and a Saturday, and we probably can't do anything with that.
2020, huh?
Yeah, that can we blame 2020 for why we only came up with 3 topics this year?
I mean, it's also shorter this year, isn't it? No, it's not. It's still 4 weeks. Never mind.
You want to check out more of our stuff and go back and listen to the more plentiful Halloween episodes from last year. We tried not to really repeat anything. So if you're looking for more Halloween content, head into your favorite podcast provider or on YouTube and type in Dissecting Fiction Halloween. They should pop up pretty quickly. You want to follow us on social media? We're all over the place, all your relevant social media. Just type in Dissecting Fiction. We'll pop up. We're good about that. We've been around for a little while now. It works well. If you're looking for some toys or collectibles, be sure to check out toystoreguide.com. Support some local businesses in your area with that. A lot of great stores on there who need your business along with all your other local businesses, comic shops, record stores, restaurants, whatever it may be. Make sure you're supporting it. You got anything else for this week, Christian?
Watch Ultraman Taiga. Going along with our Kaiju stuff, Ultraman Taiga was the new Ultraman series that came out this year, and I think some of it's on YouTube, so it's pretty easily accessible.
Yeah, and Marvel is putting out like an Ultraman origin story. They're in the middle of it right now. It's actually been pretty cool if you can take that sort of like Bendis origin story where you're not going to see anyone in costume for like 2 issues.
Ugh.
I've been enjoying it though, and they do an Ultra Q backup in the first one, which is sick.
Yeah.
But that brings us to the end of our show. If you want us to talk more about Kaiju stuff or Tokusatsu or any of that, let us know. We're both pretty well prepared in certain areas of that to do so. Until next week, I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christian Kutlick.
And have a good Halloween. Happy Halloween!
Halloween.